Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here today. The first thing I want to do is I want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And this is a national event. So no matter where you are, your chances are you're on some traditional territories that are certainly worth acknowledging and understanding as we move forward and take meaningful steps towards reconciliation. And I think that's certainly a great place to start if you feel like you don't know or don't understand how to take that step. My recommendation is there are lots of great opportunities online to dig in to figure out which traditional territories you're on, and take that as one of the first steps you can do. There's also many around the country. There are many cultural centers and spaces and places where you can go to start initiating conversations on what reconciliation can mean for you. I'm Kyle Empringham. I'm the co-founder of the Starfish Canada, and that's about the extent of what I'm gonna say today. The only other thing I'd like to note is that we're recording, as you can probably tell. So if there's any degree that's uncomfortable for you as a participant, feel free to direct message me using the Zoom or the chat function on Zoom, and we can always get that sorted for you. But for now, I'm going to pass it to today's host. I can't talk today. I'm going to pass it to today's host, Manisha Narula, who's from the League of Innovators, who's going to guide us through today's session. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Hey, everyone. It's so good to be here. I'm so excited for today. This is our last session out of our 6 sessions that we've hosted in the last 2 weeks. So I'm excited that you've made it to the last one. I'm also sad that we're ending it after this as well. Today is meant to be a really casual, pure, raw conversation with a number of change makers that have been awarded top 25 under 25 environmentalists. So big congratulations to them, first of all. Before I talk about anything in terms of what today really entails, I also want to invite Veronica from City Hive to virtually high-five these speakers and congratulate them as well.
Yes, high fives all around. High fives for everybody. Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, first off, a huge congrats to all of you. It's been really fun reading through all of your bios and also seeing a lot of familiar faces on the call today too. And I think that kind of speaks to the power of the network, not only among young environmentalists, but also the network that Starfish and this top 25 award gets to create. And so yeah, first off, a really huge congrats, and I guess welcome to the network or the community of top 25ers. And I think that the theme for today of amplifying youth voices is really modeled by this program and really modeled by all of you. And so I think we all have witnessed the power that comes from young folks organizing and mobilizing around climate, and not just in the last few years, and not just the movement led by Greta, but really thinking as well locally and thinking of the work of Autumn Pelletier in here in Canada, and also the work that all of you are doing. And I think in saying these congrats, I think also putting out a challenge to think about this moment in time and what that means for all of our work. I think right now, as we're all working on collectively reimagining what our new normal looks like, I have no doubts that that's going to be led by youth. And so I think that that's our challenge, is to really be holding that accountability to holding society accountable to what that collective reimagining looks like. And really holding climate at the center of that, holding equity at the center of that. And I think that that's modeled by all of the work that each of you do. And I'm really excited for what that looks like going forwards. But yeah, just a big congrats and another big virtual high five for all that you do. And I'm excited to listen to your stories today and to get to know all of the folks who I haven't met yet going forward as well.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Veronica. That was so well said, and such a great way to touch on the theme of today, which is amplifying youth voices and really looking at how youth are at the forefront of all the environmental innovation that's actually happening. And why we need to do all the work that we can to really celebrate their work and raise them up even more. So I'm excited to hear all the stories as well on how all our speakers have been able to do that, and how we can really inspire people of all ages to make sure that we're continuing to amplify them even more. So today, each speaker will have 5 minutes to share their story. Again, as I mentioned, these are meant to be true, raw stories, and it's not about their resume today, which I know is already amazing, but it's really about a moment of time that was really a highlight for them, and hopefully inspire you along the way as they share that as well. We have 3, potentially 4 speakers, so we'll keep you posted on that. But we will start off with our first speaker, Rachel. And before Rachel goes as well, just a couple of notes. I'm sure in the last 2 months, everyone's been really familiar with Zoom. But in case you're not, if you want to make sure you can see the speakers, you can just go to the top right and click speaker view. We also have chat open, so you're welcome to post any comments, questions on the chat function as well during or after the talk. After all the speakers go, we will have a Q&A round, so you're welcome to start posting questions during or after the talk as well. And I know some of you already use it, but you can also react during the talk, so you can send a clap, or a thumbs up, as you can see on my video as well. Amazing, some of you are already doing it. So make sure that you're engaging with the speakers during their talk, even if you're not talking to them directly during it as well. So without further ado, we will get started with Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here today. Thank you also to the Starfish for organizing all of this and trying to amplify our voices. So we were asked to tell a story today, and I wasn't exactly sure which one to tell, because I feel like activism a lot of the time is led by stories and the impacts that things around us have had. But one of the ones that I think has stuck with me and has created a love for nature was my experience as a child. I went to this really small school growing up, and we were taught about planting gardens and the importance of seeds, about pollinators, and I became really passionate about butterflies, especially monarchs. And because of this, my parents decided to find a sanctuary within Ontario that they could show me, what monarchs and butterflies, their impacts really are. And so we went there, and I was simply taken aback by just the miracle that our pollinators really are and their incredible life cycles. And they used to have this space where they would sell monarch caterpillars so that people could bring them home and raise them to release them and experience that. So I got to watch this incredible metamorphosis process from a caterpillar to a chrysalis to a butterfly. And as my passion for them grew, I started to find out more and more about how they were really going endangered. Within the past couple decades, we've lost 90% of our monarch populations. And I also started to find out that monarchs really are a keystone species in the fact that they indicate the entire health of an ecosystem. If monarch populations are on the decline, it means that all other pollinator populations are also on the decline. So that sort of sparked my mind to say that we need to start to conserve them. And year after year, we started to go back, and I began to realize that they had fewer and fewer caterpillars for sale. And finally, in the last year, they had absolutely none left. And when talking to the volunteer, she told me that they couldn't find any, and that monarchs had almost completely disappeared from the area. So as I began the drive home with my parents, looking around the area, I really couldn't help but notice that almost the entirety of the area was covered in genetically modified crops. And there were spray trucks with pesticides and herbicides all around the area, spraying incredible amounts of herbicides such as Roundup that were impacting the food supply for the monarchs, that were impacting their life cycles. And that really struck a chord with me, understanding that really monarchs and pollinators in total are under attack because of our food system. And that's starting to be proven time and time again. And in a lot of ways, I feel like my life has somewhat come full circle, because from experiencing that and seeing just the impact that our food system has, it's led me to create a monarch conservation program, but more than that, visit Mexico to watch their migration patterns. And that was just the most incredible experience, seeing millions of monarchs collect in one space. And it gives me hope knowing that that is a possibility to continue to protect this species, and finding out that there's more threats than we even realize, that a lot of it is our own consumerism. Going to Mexico and seeing that it was more than just the Western food system, but it was what we were demanding. They're cutting down currently entire forests to cut down to grow avocados because there's such a huge demand right now. So understanding our own consumerism and how it's deeply connected to every part of our lives. And I think that's what Monarchs have taught me over the past few years, is that not only are they bringing joy to people all around the world, but it's also the deep, intricate connection that we have to everything around us, from our food system to the connection that we have with nature outdoors. And I really hope that everybody will be able to experience that, because it is so vital to understand that connection.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Rachel. That was really great. And I can see how you're so passionate about that topic and how you discovered this, and are really driven to make sure people are also understanding their connection to the food system as well, which is amazing. Amazing. So we will move on to Lindsay. Lindsay, you're up next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay, but with an X. And I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to share this space and this time with you today. I wanted to preface my story with the fact that, I am Albanian and I grew up in Albania. I moved to Canada when I was a child with my family. And what's really interesting is that in my language and my culture, there's no word for sustainability. So Albanian is a really rich language, and it's actually often hard for me the opposite way around to find English words for Albanian equivalents. But I never grew up with a word for sustainability or climate change. But as I started entering educational institutions in Canada, what became increasingly clear to me is that my grandparents especially, who don't have education past the second grade, had actually taught me about sustainability my whole life. And there's really interesting principles of just the social fabric in my culture, where you respect the land and you have to always be in balance and with how much you take and how much you give to your community, and that's physical community, your people, etc. And even though there's no specific words for it, it seemed like it had been instilled in my childhood and in the way that I was raised, which I found really interesting. And I think that's fueled my passion for helping to make these topics and these spaces more accessible to young people that maybe don't usually have, whether it's the vocabulary or the access to classic environmental activism. One of my most profound experiences, I'd say, in this work was starting in a little business a few years ago called Sproutworks, where we hired youth to install hydroponic systems. So it's hydroponic systems, for those that aren't familiar. It's like indoor gardening without soil. It's a water pump and nutrient system. We installed those in senior homes, and we actually hired youth to go into the senior homes, teach seniors how to work the systems, how to grow greens all year round. And we targeted urban senior homes who literally just had a cement front yard and no balconies. And then we would have cooking classes and focus on vegetarian and sustainable recipes with these seniors every 2 weeks. And I went into it with a plan of, this is a really great way of making sustainable food systems more accessible to seniors. Nobody knew what hydroponics was. For a solid 2 months, they totally thought it was witchcraft and didn't really trust it. They're is this really gonna grow? Can we really eat it? And it was really funny. The first time they would try what we made, they'd be afraid to touch it, almost it would glow or sparkle, or it was really fun. We got the best questions. And I went into it thinking, okay, it's a great way to make it accessible, but also having a background in healthcare, I know that there's a lot of supply chain issues with senior care homes and other healthcare providing homes. So it was a great way to reduce carbon footprint for them, especially a lot of senior homes had the space to put really compact towers and just grow as much of their produce as possible for their on-site kitchens. And it ended up being so much more than that. So I actually learned a lot about about rerouting my work and everything that my family and my culture has taught me, whether it's in Albania or here, about making this work accessible. Coming from doing a master's in sustainability and being in the bubble, it's often easy to use the same jargon, vernacular, to assume that everybody's on the same page, has the same background knowledge and privilege and access to that knowledge, but that's often not the case. And those seniors, but also the staff, really brought me back to that. Something as simple as adaptation and climate mitigation, like nobody knew what I was saying. Like nobody had a clue what a carbon footprint of getting their lettuce on their plate was. And it was just this really, I get goosebumps every time I talk about it. I've also worked with kids and in camps a lot just to pay rent and pay school. And it was almost like teaching a kid how to ride a bike, of like, I don't need to tell you about physics and why this bike is being balanced, but you just need to understand that you push these pedals and then you'll create momentum and you can go to your favorite places faster than if you walked. And it was the same with the seniors. Of you don't necessarily need to know what climate adaptation and mitigation is, but you just need to know that this is a really great way to grow some basil or some salad or some lettuce or whatever it may be. And here are some other benefits of you eating this type of diet. And it was really profound for me too, and has influenced the work that I do now. So like now in my current role at Youthful Cities, we're a social enterprise that works with youth in cities across the world to make their cities better places to live, work, and play. I'm leading on a climate change project, which the entire goal is actually to take climate data and make it accessible, but also welcoming to the folks that aren't in our bubble, to the folks that aren't the Gretas, who maybe really do care about our planet, but don't know what else they could do besides buy a reusable bag or a reusable mug, and don't know what climate adaptation or mitigation is, and feel like they're not necessarily, sometimes they're intimidated by the space. And I take the learnings from that Sproutworks project and my time with the seniors, and I try to bring that to my work every day now. And I love it. I just, yeah, I feel very lucky and privileged to do the work that I do. And thank you for letting me share a little bit of that with you today.
Incredible. Thanks, Lindsay. That was great. Yeah, I feel like the way we talk about climate change and sustainability here can be so specific. And I love how you really stepped out of that bubble and are able to connect with how people are talking about sustainability in all parts of the world, which is really beautiful. All right, so we have 2 more speakers left. Once again, if you have any questions or comments, post them on the chat. You can also privately send it to either myself or Kyle if you feel more comfortable doing that as well. But we'll move on to our next speaker, Marina.
Hey, thanks so much. Hello, everybody. It's really good to be here. Also, thanks, Lindsay and Rachel, for sharing your stories. I'm excited to hear the one after me as well. I'm calling you today from the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, currently known as Vancouver, British Columbia. And my story is a little bit different. It's a little bit more of a cautionary tale, so it should be interesting. Before I get into it, though, I want to sort of gauge the audience a little bit. If I say COP25, like maybe put in the chat if you know what that means or if you don't know what that means. I'm just wondering if folks, right after Lindsay talking about like using jargon and stuff, I don't want to be using jargon that people don't understand. Okay, I see that there's at least one person that doesn't know what that means. No worries, let's talk about it. Okay, so COP25 stands for Conference of the Parties. And when I say COP25, I'm talking about the United Nations big climate change conference. And they host these climate change conferences they've hosted them every year for 25 years. So the one that happened in 2019 in December was the 25th climate change conference that they hosted. To sort of simplify it a little bit. So COP25 is just shorthand for the 25th big climate conference that the United Nations hosted. And they hosted it in Madrid in December of 2019. And at these conferences, they've become quite big deals in the sort of international environmental climate policy space, in that almost every country comes to these conferences and they debate and negotiate rules and agreements for how we're going to address this climate change problem as a global community. And we've seen a lot of sort of big, important documents and agreements come out of these events and negotiations in the past. However, they're not always that accessible to attend, and they're not always very open. And I'm the founder of a youth-led organization called Youth for Nature, and we are advocating for the inclusion of nature specifically in climate policy and the inclusion of youth in climate policy around the world. And we were super fortunate to be able to host a youth delegation, so a group of young people from 6 different countries. There's 8 of us coming from 6 different countries. We were able to bring these young people to COP25. So we went to Madrid for the 2-week conference to participate and contribute to all of the events that are happening at this conference, because it's not just policy negotiations, but it's also workshops and panels and high-level events and receptions, and there's so much going on. These conferences have become quite big. So I was able to go to Madrid with a couple of other young people that we were able to bring with us. And I was invited by the Chilean, so the president of this conference was the country Chile this year. And I was invited by the Chilean government, to participate as a panelist at this big, important, high-level meeting on forests, which was a really big deal for me. I mean, they reached out to me without any prompting. Like, I never contacted them. They found me and somehow knew about me and about Youth for Nature and the work that I was specifically doing, advocating for forests and other natural ecosystems to be included in climate policy. And they wanted me to be a youth representative at this big event that had environmental ministers from other countries, that had some pretty big names from big UN groups like the UN Environment Program or the UN Development Program. And this was a big deal because it was almost like, I'm going to be in this room with all these high-level folks and they have to listen to me because they're all going to be invited, and some of them are going to be panelists too. And this is really a once-in-a-lifetime almost opportunity to talk to these high-level decision makers and people, and talk to them about not only forests in climate policy, but talk to them about youth and youth leadership and what youth leadership means and looks like in this space. So I spent a lot of time preparing for this event, talking to the other members of Youth for Nature, talking to other youth leaders that was in my network. And I spent a lot of time freaking out about this event, trying to think, what am I going to say? I have like 3 minutes, on this panel. How am I going to make this meaningful? How can I honor the people that I want to try to represent? And it was a huge opportunity. But then when the date came, turns out that there was actually 3 sections to this event. And I was slotted in the last section, which was called Sustainability and Inclusion. And there are the other sort of panelists in this section were like an indigenous leader from Ecuador was there, and there were a couple other youth leaders there, and there was a faith leader there. So it's sort of almost like picking one from each of the sort of other stakeholders or actor groups and coming onto this panel. And it turns out that this panel was after the panel where all the ministers and high-level people spoke. And then on the date they were running late, like extremely late. Like, I think our panel was 3 hours behind schedule. And by the time that I actually got to step out on the stage and sit in the chair, I'm going to do this. I'm gonna hack the call and show a picture. There's me during the event. And by the time we actually got to go on, I mean, we were 3 hours behind schedule, and the high-level folks that were speaking before us all left. So all the policy makers, all the decision makers, the high-level UN people didn't want to stick around, especially because it was running late, to listen to the inclusion speakers. they also misspelled my name on the, like, butchered my name on the flyers and on the slides, which, I mean, usually isn't a really big deal, but it kind of felt like the last piece of evidence I needed to realize that our voices, not mine and the other voices on that panel, weren't valued as much as the other high-level folks that were speaking before us that didn't have time to listen to us. So I was pretty furious and gave a pretty impassioned speech. But this was, and the thing is, this is not the first time this happened. In fact, the exact same thing happened to me again during COP, during that conference where I was invited to another high-level meeting, was again on like an inclusion panel, and all the high-level folks that spoke before me all left by the time our panel started, so they didn't get to listen to us speak. I mean, I gave an impassioned speech there too, and I was able to connect with other cool young people and other cool folks that liked what I had to say, which was awesome. But did I like create the change that I was hoping to? No, definitely not. The folks that I wanted to speak to weren't there and weren't there to listen to me. So I guess what's the lesson here? One, we need to speak our truths when we're in positions like this, because this is a privileged position that I was in, and I had opportunity to access this mainstream platform, and it was my responsibility to speak out about and be honest about why this kind of engagement and voice amplification is insufficient. And youth need to support each other when we're in those spaces, because it's scary to do that. But I think the more important lesson is that us as young people need to create our own platforms, because the ones that are existing are often rare, or they're limiting, or they don't serve us. That's what we're trying, one of the things that we're trying to do at Youth for Nature through hosting our own, and we did that at COP, at the conference, by hosting our own workshops that were specifically youth-led workshops or youth-led events for young people. And those were the best, that was the best time that I had at those conferences, or at those workshops that we hosted or that other youth groups hosted and attending those ones. But we also need to create our own spaces, both online and in person. So in speaking to the theme, I guess, of this event, Amplify Youth Voices, this is a story of when my voice was supposed to be amplified, but it wasn't, and why we need to advocate as young people for meaningful youth engagement over tokenism, over symbolic representation of young people on inclusion panels, and not just young people. I was beside Indigenous leaders, I was beside faith leaders, I was beside cool civil society leaders who are also being sidelined in that moment. We need to support each other as young people, and we need to make our own spaces, but most importantly, we need to like amplify each other's voices, because I think youth amplifying each other's voices will be much more powerful and much more effective than relying on these mainstream and often restricting existing platforms.
Yes, that was so good. Thank you. And I'm sure, like, and as people have already said, like, can totally relate and can see how it feels to be put in that position as well, and what it means to really find that balance where you're given the stage at such a massive event with all these decision makers and policymakers, but also the importance of still creating and building your own platform and spaces as well, which is so well said. Amazing. Thank you, Marina. We're going to move to our last speaker, Leejoo. I believe Leejoo's on. Perfect. Your video's on as well. All right, go for it.
So I didn't really come prepared, I'll be honest with you all. But I can share a little story. First of all, I've never been in a group where I could relate so much of being youth and not being able to get heard out. I think for me, my uncle was a pastor, and so I kind of grew up in a church setting, and kind of one of our core values is always kind of giving back. And you could imagine by the time I got into high school, I was kind of getting tired of doing the same thing. And as I became more aware of leadership positions, I realized like, oh, like I could be a decision maker too. Like I'm kind of an expert in this field, or I'm kind of good at this, right? So yeah, I think like maybe in grade 9 or grade 10, at one point, I just got so tired of doing all the repetitive tasks. Like I now knew the ins and outs, And I had some like kind of like mid management skills that I can maybe apply to maybe lead an organization. But I think one of the toughest issues is that, especially like maybe in high school, I was a little bit young, and I had a bit of a baby face, and I was kind of going up to all these adults and like, hey, I really want to do this, and like, and the first thing I wanted to create was a little free library. I thought, I live in the community of Fraser Heights in Surrey, where there's a lot of immigrant families, and I grew up being a huge avid book reader, and being in an immigrant community, I thought, our library is about like 15 minutes away. Why don't it be awesome to have a little library where we can all recycle our books? Um, so I tried that. I went to my school. I talked to my principal. My principal was like, "What? You're crazy. Who's gonna give you space?" I go to the city. The city is like, "Wait, how are you gonna do this? Like, aren't you a little bit too young for it?" But the funny thing is, I was part of my woodworking class, and I knew how to build things very well. And eventually, I kept advocating for myself so much that along the way, I met someone named David who worked for the city. So through connections like that, I was able to get a grant from the city of Surrey, and then get approval for some space at a local park. And at the same time, I was able to finally convince my principal. So the way the grant worked, it was like a reimbursement system, and I never had enough money throughout high school, so I convinced my principal to like lend me some money. It's like, here, I have this like email for you, and I have this like check coming in later. So I was able to finally convince the people around me that that I could do something, and went to my woodwork teacher, and he helped me out with it. It was a super long process of trying to gain support in order to get things done. And I thought that was a little bit unfair. I thought, I've seen other organizations pull this off so quickly, but like, why did it take me so long? And I think the one thing I realized is, as youth, we don't have that credibility and trust built as kind of the branding of who we are. I felt that a little bit. As I met new people, I felt the expectation was like, you're young, you're unexperienced, so you probably can't do it. So the way I try to leverage myself and my other colleagues and other students, and the way I try to empower them is to put them in an organizational setting. It's kind of like how workers individually at like big companies aren't very powerful, but once they form unions, that's when they have some voting rights and they get to fight for the things they want. So that's why I found the local development group, which is just a little community organization, just focus on doing good in the community. So after I was able to build some support networks from building that little free library, I opened up local development group, expanded into local development clubs through each school, and then we were able to start community projects like community gardens. We had a beehive that the teachers at my school were fighting for 5 years, and we worked with the Wildlife Federation and getting some pollinators and all that good stuff. So, I mean, I think the moral of the story for me is just, create something and then present it to the world and see how the world will take it in. And I think what I've learned throughout the journey of volunteering and building up my own nonprofit is don't tackle problems in the world by yourself, but with others who also believe in your vision. So one of the projects that I'm working on, Kyle may know this person, Raj, is called Meaningful Work. And we're trying to get more corporate volunteers into the impact space, because there's, corporations are so competitive for the best talent. And actually, Manisha, we are actually trying to also work with Global Shapers right now and getting a pilot project working. I don't know if you've heard. So yeah, I found that working in an organization setting is really empowering for youth, especially if you're in a setting to give yourself very cool titles like co-founder, CEO, and you have, so I don't know, I just thought that was fun, and it's very empowering to give yourself the power to make your own decisions and give the title you want. So that's my takeaway. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Leejoo. That was great for someone who felt he was unprepared. Thanks for being so true to sharing your story and really showing us. And again, we can all relate so much about how much we have to deal with pushback as young people trying to really make some sort of change, whether it's small or big, in any sort of community that we're part of. So it's amazing to see like the process that you went through to make that happen. So that was incredible. Thank you to the four of you for sharing those stories. We still have a few more minutes for questions. So I do have a couple of questions sent my way. Again, if you still have anything, you still have time to send that over chat as well. But my first question to all of you is, this theme kind of came up, especially in the last two talks, around how that like lack of credibility is sometimes the biggest barrier for young people, and you do have to do a lot of convincing, and it's like mentally exhausting sometimes as well. So I want to see like what are the actionable pieces that like either someone has done for you to help you push through, or you have done for another young person to help them push through this barrier, whether it's like the mentorship that's been provided, but like advice that for everyone else on the call as well, in terms of how we can make sure we're doing this like work in the right way too. So we can start off, we can go in the order of the talks that were done. So Rachel, if you want to start us off.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, I think there's a lot of barriers put up for young people. And I think as soon as you are young and you speak up for an issue that is often controversial, whether it be environmental or human rights or animal rights, whatever that might look like, we're automatically almost discredited as being too young to understand the importance of what we're talking about. And it's really unfortunate that our society has gotten to that point where our voices are automatically discredited. But I do think that there is a lot of change happening, obviously, as youth climate movements grow, as youth organizations become more common. I think the biggest piece of advice is find your community, because regardless of whether you're fighting for a topic that is environmental or for human protections, you're always going to have adversaries. It's really going to happen no matter what. But find your community, find people who care about you, who will work with you through it, because it really doesn't matter what people say at the end of the day. You just have to prove them wrong. And show that you are credible, that you do know your stuff, that you are passionate, and that's all that matters, because you do make a real change that way. And it's better to have young people standing up and talking about these issues than the issues not being talked about at all. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice, is push through it and find ways to find joy and positivity that allow yourself to work through it. And I often find that there is more positive feedback than negative. So just listen to the positive rather than the negative.
Just to follow up on that, how did you personally find your community? Again, to like see how, like, give that advice to others that are trying to still seek that out as well.
Sure. I think the fact that we have internet and technology at our disposal has been an incredible tool that we're lucky. I mean, generations before us didn't have that. And I don't think it's the solution, but it definitely gives us more of an opportunity to find people who are like-minded, who care about the same issues, who want to work together, who want to collaborate. So I think that's a great thing, is to reach out to other organizations, find other youth who are interested, and even check in your schools, look at clubs, look at different opportunities like that, because as much as it may not seem like a big deal, finding like-minded people is one of the greatest things that you can possibly do to get yourself through some of the tougher times.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Lindsay.
I think to echo part of what Rachel said, I think it's definitely like we have the right to take up space and to start initiatives and to give opinions just as much as anybody else does. And I think even if there's a societal push to like discredit young people of our space and that right, we still have that, like, we still have access to that. I think the other side though is like, it can be incredibly exhausting to continuously fight for space and time and then be met up with more walls. Especially like as a young person, as a young woman also. And I can't speak to what it would be like to be a young racialized woman facing even more barriers in these spaces. So I do think the other half of this equation is folks with power sharing that power and lifting us up into spaces, and say even something as simple as, you know, if I, being somebody in a decision-making capacity, have to go and give a speech at a dinner, at a event, etc., why don't you give the first 20 minutes? Why don't you give the speech saying that to a young person? Like, that can be monumental. Because what I think one of the limiting factors for us is we don't have access to resources and access to decision-making spaces. And no matter how hard we fight, we still need somebody else to help pull us into those spaces. Now, the other side of that is, I think when we do get access to those spaces, we should become those people for our peers, because we cannot rely on other people, older, male, pale, stale, whatever they are, making decisions and wait for them to give us that space. Like, I know that if I get space to an event, like, I'm gonna bring at least one of my colleagues or my friends, because I got there by somebody opening up space for me, so I need to bring somebody along with me as well. And just being mindful of, and I don't like the pay your dues system. I don't think, and I want to make it really clear that that's not what I'm advocating for. I don't think we need to pay our dues. Like, I think we have validity and we have the right to be in these spaces inherently. So I think if we get access, share the access. Like, we need to support each other in that way. And then we'll hit a critical mass, honestly, and then it'll be sick, hopefully. Fingers crossed. So, yeah.
Amazing. That was so passionate. I love it. And it seems
fired
like
up about this stuff.
it's great. It's great. I mean, it seems like there's been a lot of people in your life that have like really provided you with those opportunities and mentorship, but at the same time, you've really also been that person for yourself as well, which is incredible. Marina.
I mean, echo what everything that both Rachel and Lindsay just said. I will answer this with another really short story of how other people have supported me in these scary, weird times. A video of me speaking at a conference at one of these high-level spaces went viral in September, and I didn't ask for that. it was super exciting and cool. Funny thing is, these media companies that produce these little videos that go viral on Facebook and Twitter, they don't like ask for your permission. They just kind of film it. And then I found it like literally scrolling through Twitter. I'm like, wait, that's my face on the video that has like 100,000 likes. And it was super exciting, but it was also really scary, especially looking at some of the comments on Facebook and like just, I mean, you can't read the comments, you can't let that get to you, but like, of course it does. I'm a human being. There were lots of comments, especially like saying exactly what we were talking about before, about youth not being seen as credible, or like, oh, you're too young, you don't actually know what you're talking about. Like, just wait till you're like for my age or whatever, and you'll change your mind. Silly young girl that doesn't know what she's talking about. And that was pretty freaky. And what happened was the group of young people that I was with in that space just took it on themselves to make their own comments and try to like overwhelm the comment space with positive things about me and about young people in general. And those ended up being like, now they're the top comments on Facebook are the ones from my friends saying really positive and nice things. And that felt like a small micro example, I guess, of young people like supporting each other in these spaces. Because when you are the sort of tokenistic youth in this space, which sucks, like it's kind of our responsibility to speak out against that and to try to open it up to as many other young people as possible. But at the same time, that's a really scary thing. And we have to be supporting each other in doing that so that we can continue to do that and take care of ourselves while we're in these spaces.
Amazing. Thanks, Marina. It's every small action makes a massive difference, whether you're commenting on someone's post, whether you're purchasing something from a female-run business, like everything makes a difference. So that was great. Leejoo.
Yeah, for me, so I've already talked about one David, but I actually had kind of two Davids in my life that kind of gave me a lot of opportunities for me going forward into community engagement. So one David was David Daly, who was a community activist running Village Surrey. And he often gave me a platform to speak my mind. As nervous as I was being the youngest kid in the room, um, and like I've never really talked in front of groups of people, but always giving me new opportunities to challenge myself and so manage certain bits, of maybe this organization to give me a better understanding of how I can run an organization. And then we also had the David from the city of Surrey, David Sadler, who gave me the opportunity and the knowledge of the different grants available at the city, and then connected me to the various other staff who could also better support me. And I think in terms of, I've received a lot of help, and I think I was able to do that because I was able to be vulnerable. I was like, hey, I'm not completely sure what I'm doing, but this is the vision and plan that I want to execute. And I think that's very important, is to seek help. It's 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 one of the benefits we have of being a student, because you know throughout high school, I just I was on LinkedIn throughout high school because I had a feeling I had to be a business kid. So I'd be just reaching out to people. It's like, hey, like, love the work that you're doing. We want to learn more. And I'd just be randomly calling people up and like, who the hell are you? It's like, oh, I'm just some high school kid. So they feel bad to like just hang up, and they just kind of be on the line, trying to tell my story. So I think vulnerability is really important in terms of being able to receive that help. But for me, in terms of kind of giving back to my younger peers, every year we have Frosh coming up in universities, and the way I try to give back, also replicating from what I did in my nonprofit when I was leading, is to be kind of a servant. I'm a huge believer in a very like servant leadership style, and I think that can truly unlock people's potential. So what that meant in my nonprofit setting was being like, hey, don't worry about any of the money, don't worry about any of the logistics. It's like, what do you really want to do? So one, like, for example, we had a lot of like gamers in our club, and they're like, oh, like, there's this game called League of Legends. And they're like, oh, we'd love to have a League of Legends tournament. It's like, okay, let's plan this out. I'll sit down with them, and come up with strategies. Like, here, you take you take half of it. I'll help you with the other half, and if you finish your other half, you can take over my other half, and you can lead the project. So some of the things we were able to achieve was that we were able to bring on board the makers of League of Legends, Riot Games, on board into sponsoring our event, and then we were able to bring some game news agency to further sponsor it. And I think being able to empower by getting other people to empower. So it's like a bit of an empowerment chain. You can kind of tell by I'm empowering him, by me helping him out, and then we have other people empowering me, and then that empowers him again. I think that's really important. Creating another community of support networks. So yeah, those are some of my tips.
Thanks, Leejoo. I love that led to another story, and it's amazing, yeah, that ripple effect and the impact that can really make. Just to be mindful of time, I think that, like, I know that was one question, but so much came out of that, that I feel that was a beautiful way to like wrap it up as well. I would love to hear from all the speakers, and I feel like Leejoo, you've touched on this as well, but feel free to add on if you'd like. But basically, one thing that you're committing to doing to make sure you're continuing to amplify other people's voices that we all can learn from and feel inspired by as well. So one quick thing that you're committing to doing starting today, tomorrow.
One quick thing that I hope to do starting today and tomorrow, and what I sort of been doing is trying to bring in other young people and giving them a voice. Like we were all saying, I think bringing other people to the table is so incredibly important, and especially people of color who may face a lot greater challenges than perhaps I would. So I think it's important to amplify those voices and make sure that everybody has an equal say at the table.
Nice. Thank you, Rachel. Lindsay.
I have huge difficulties with scope and quick things, but one quick thing that I commit to doing is mentoring somebody else that is going through the same master's program I did, and just mentoring them through that journey and how to bridge the transition between school and life and what that looks like.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think that that's something we can all do, is like, you know, if we've had mentors in our lives, like commit to mentoring at least one other person. Marina.
Also had difficulties with scope. So this isn't really a quick thing, but it is like a priority for me and the organization that I work with is Youth for Nature. One of our main areas of work is storytelling. And we ran the storytelling campaign last fall, and we want to relaunch it and make it better and think of how can we better support the young people that are sharing their stories with us. What kind of support do young people need in different parts of the world who are leading on nature and climate action in their communities, and how can we, like, to use your words, Leejoo, how can we be servants for those young people as young people ourselves who understand kind of the position that they're in. So that's more of a long-term thing, but that is sort of a big priority and something that I'm putting front of mind from now and tomorrow and the next day.
Mm-hmm. Stories go a long way, and I'm sure there's a lot that we can learn from the model that Starfish has been implementing in terms of sharing these stories as well. Okay, Leejoo, do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've kind of mentioned it already, but I'm committed to empowering the impact space. So it doesn't have to be so much of a sacrifice to choose a career for maybe working in charities or nonprofits.
Yeah, perfect. Beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone. Once again, congratulations for everything that you've been able to accomplish, and the work that you're doing to really empower the community and really amplify those voices. It really doesn't go unnoticed. So thanks everyone for being here, for being with us throughout this whole hour and listening and engaging with us. We really appreciate it. And of course, a big congratulations to the Starfish community and Kyle in general for making all these events happen. And we're officially wrapped up these event series. This was so inspiring. Kyle, do you have any last words to wrap up this virtual storytelling series?
Awesome, thank you. No, thank you so much for everyone for participating. Really great to hear these stories, to provide space for these stories. Know that we'll share out these stories in a few different ways. If you've participated in an event, you'll get a link to all of them in their entirety. We'll also be sharing them out on social media. They're great stories that are certainly worth telling, and we're going to do whatever we can to get them out in the world.
Awesome. All right. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Feel free to come off mute and say bye. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, folks.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
No worries.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.